Okay, so hello everybody, and thanks for being here today at the presentation of the issue of South Atlantic Quarterly called Platformization and Its Discontents. This issue has been edited by the Into the Black Box research group. We want to, first of all, thanks the authors that are here today to discuss the issue, and Michael Hart, he is the director of the journal. So thanks also to Michael for being here with us today. I just want to introduce today's presentation with really few words. What is important for us as Into the Black Box research group is that in this issue, we think that some of the main dynamics of the crucial points that make platforms a disruptive phenomena and that are making platforms a sort of new historical turning point emerge. So within all the articles that characterize this issue, we can find some common points that for us are really crucial. So first of all, and this is something that in today's presentation we would like to stress. One crucial point is that digital platforms, or to say it better, platformization processes are planetary phenomena. So we are assisting to a phenomena that is not confined within specific areas of the world, but platformization are emerging again as a planetary phenomena. Of course, this does not imply that platforms are homogeneous actors, that platforms perform in the same way in all different places, but that we have to keep in mind this planetary dimension when we analyze platforms with the specificities and the commonalities that characterize this phenomena. Secondly, platforms are vectors that are radically reshaping the world of labor and economies more widely, and the pandemic has deeply accelerated this phenomena. So the pandemic can be considered as a turning point also for platformization processes, and I do not need to stress that also in this moment we are doing this presentation on a platform. The third point that for us is a quite intriguing characteristic of platformization processes is the way in which they are recombining productive and reproductive dynamics. So this is an aspect that is for us quite crucial for the analysis of platform capitalism. And the fourth point that I want to mention in this very brief introduction is that platforms are not a top-down phenomena, are not a neutral phenomena, but they are a battlefield. So digital platforms are a new terrain, a new contested terrain in which, through which we can probably see some of the main tendencies that will characterize the future of labor, the future of our cities, the future of our society as a whole. So these are some points that for us could be helpful for today's discussion. We have four presentations by four authors that have contributed to this issue of South Atlantic Quarterly. Then Michael Hart will discuss and pose some questions and comments for the authors. and then there will be a round of comments and questions. We ask to the people that are in the Zoom link to directly intervene if they want, and we ask to people that are following this presentation on Facebook to eventually write down their questions on Facebook. So thanks again to everybody for being here today, and we can start the presentation. The first intervention is by Fabio Luis Ferreira Nobrega Franco, who is author of the article Neoliberal Platform Capitalism and Subjectivity, a study of the mobilization between labor platformization and viração in Brazil. So please, Fabio, go on for your presentation.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay. So first of all, I want to thank the Into the Black Box group for inviting me to participate in this event. It's for sure a great honor to share this roundtable with such preeminent scholars whose work has been inspiring my research and my reflections. So thank you very much. I will try to present my paper in 10 minutes. So let's start by analyzing the platform capitalism's apparatuses of controlling, managing, and exploiting delivery work in Brazil. My published paper aimed at depicting the structure and functioning of the platform capitalism's psychic and affective power. It stands from the perspective from below in the sense of the concept developed by the Argentinian sociologist Veronica Gago in her work Neoliberalism from Below, Popular Pragmatics and Baroque Economies. According to Gago, neoliberalism should be understood by adopting a perspective not only from above, that is to say, departing from the international agenda and political institutions, but also and mainly from below, particularly from popular informal economies. At this level, neoliberalism rationality meets immanent and territorialized dynamics in which forms of life proliferate, reorganizing, according to Gago, notions of freedom, calculation, and obedience. Following Gago framework, we attempted to feature the structure, characteristics, and mode of functioning of the platform neoliberal capitalism from below. Indeed, what Fandon and his colleagues call actually existing platformization must be taken as forged through interactions with local elements, different political rationalities, and predetermined savoir-faire's. These interactions also embrace the platform's psychic power, which features an assemblage of the neoliberal entrepreneurial self and the forms of worker subjectivation already present in the Brazilian peripheral areas as a mode of living and working called in Portuguese, viração. Briefly speaking, viração is a kind of popular entrepreneurship inherent to the Brazilian capitalism. As stated by the Brazilian sociologist Carlos Freire da Silva, viração is characterized by lateral mobility between a series of contingent activities marked by instability and inconstancy, as well as between legal and illegal expedients. It is a type of work fully dependent on making do on a daily basis. At the psychic level, viração is entangled with certain dispositions such as flexibility, risk assessment capabilities, and a work ethos culturally represented by the figure of guerreiro, a Portuguese word that should be understood in this context as a fierce fighter in the war for daily survival. Like a warrior, the peripheral worker is supposed to perform capacities such as beating the odds, turning risk into an opportunity for personal strengthening and gain, overcoming his or her fears and limitations. Those subjective skills were at the grassroots when the first platform companies arrived in Brazil around 2016. As the paper claims, the platform companies took advantage of the viração to build their own mechanisms of controlling and exploiting labor, which tried to subsume viração, accommodating it to neoliberal subjectivity standards. In this regard, it is instructive to observe how the ideal of flexibility is understood and managed by app companies, not only as a psychic skill that allows a single worker to perform multiple functions, but also as a worker's willingness to operate within zones of indetermination between the legal and the illicit. Delivery workers in Brazil often and patently admit they regularly commit traffic violations, such as crossing red lights, riding or driving against the traffic, or speeding to fulfill an order more quickly, risking their lives in the hope of receiving better customer evaluations or tips. What is being encouraged and rewarded in situations like these is one's ability to play a high-risk game at the very edge of legality, to face up to the daily challenges inherent in one's profession like a good warrior, however dangerous these challenges might be, and beat the competition posed by all other workers. That helps to explain the striking statistics of delivery workers involved in traffic accidents in Brazil, mainly in São Paulo, both as the victims and as the responsible. Another consequence of the neoliberal platform capitalism appropriation of viração appears in an ongoing tendency to undermine and ultimately dismantle any remaining social and territorial network formed by the traditional peripheral workers in Brazil. Hence, the sense of isolation that affects the app worker, now recast into the role of the lone heroic warrior who must fend for him or herself without expecting any assistance from peers who might turn out to be potential enemies and are, in either case, his or her direct competition. Besides that, the heroic ethos fits the male gendered quintessence of neoliberalism, impelling the workers to blame whoever asks for help or manifests any signal of weakness and suffering. The Brazilian researcher Eduardo Rumenig heard from a platform worker a statement synthesizing the platform's ideal of virility. If one wants to be weak, one should give up. The work of delivery on the streets belongs to the strongest workers. It is for the lions, not for the kittens, said the delivery worker. By co-opting viração and reshaping it into the entrepreneurial subjectivity favored by neoliberalism, Brazilian platform capitalism has succeeded in extending its control and management into areas that had hitherto remained at the margins of the exploitative practices of capital. Peripheral territories, along with their survival strategies and sociability networks. Through the platformization of viração, a profound commodification of peripheral lives is underway. This, in turn, will most likely lead them to new strategies of resistance, such as new organizational models or new ways of struggling, as was represented by Apple workers' strikes, such as the breque dos apps work stoppage in English here in Brazil. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to debating with you.
Thanks a lot, Fabio. So we can go on with the next presentation by Niels van Doorn, who is a co-author along with Eva Moss and Jelke Bosma of the article Actually Existing Platformization, Embedding Platforms in Urban Spaces Through Partnerships. So please, Niels, go on.
Yeah, hello, everyone. Well, first of all, thanks for inviting us. I'm going to speak on our behalf of the three authors. I'm very happy to get an opportunity to kind of summarize our main insights and claims that we make in this article. I'm going to try to do so in the 10 minutes I have allotted to me. And I prepared a couple of slides, so I'm going to share my screen before continuing. Oh, the host says disabled participant screen sharing. Could you fix that?
You should be able to do it now.
Yep. All right. There we go. So you see what I'm seeing, right? Okay. Good. So maybe before I really get started, just a quick note on that notion of actually existing platformization that we are introducing in this paper. So it's kind of it's a concept or conceptual approach that we're still kind of developing, and in this paper we're doing kind of a first take on this by looking at partnerships. And the notion is kind of meant, it builds of course on actually existing neoliberalism, as that conceptual framework has been developed especially by Jamie Peck, Neil Brenner, Nick Theodore, and we kind of put that perspective, that analytical framework, in the context of platforms and platformizations, and it's really meant to kind of look at the discrepancies between so-called textbook accounts of what platforms are and what they do. You know, the platform logics and operations that we all, I think, are quite familiar with by now. And what platforms do and want and can do when they actually hit the ground, when the rubber hits the road, so to speak. In particular jurisdictions, in particular frequently urban settings, when they actually have to engage with and negotiate with a whole set of public and private stakeholders, and have to make do with particular infrastructures and material surroundings. There's, in short, a discrepancy between what platforms say they do and want, and what they actually can do, and that they cannot always get what they want. So that kind of idea is behind the notion of actually existing platformization. What actually happens when a platform enters a city or another type of environment or jurisdiction and wants to expand its platform and its boundaries kind of into the formerly outside territories, and kind of incorporate those territories and actors inside of its platform or its platform ecosystem. Well, in this paper, so quickly kind of moving into the topic of this paper, we're trying to tackle that and think about actually existing platformization through the notion of partnership building, partnership formation. So we take partnership building as kind of an under-researched mode of platformization. So there's, I'll also just hit this and you can see, again, when we think about what platforms do and how they operate, we don't often think about the partnerships as a mode of platformization. And that's what we're trying to elaborate here. By also building on our colleagues, Anne Helmond, David Nieborg, who have written about so-called boundary resources in a more technical way, in the context of Facebook's API or Facebook's growth through API development. But we're taking that kind of more technical approach to boundary resources, and we're applying it more in a more social, socioeconomic context. And we see partnerships as a heterogeneous boundary resource that enables platforms to generate, and then we quote them, dependencies and become embedded and gain power in other public as well as private domains. So partnerships, just like software development kits or APIs, are one way to kind of pierce through and thereby expand the boundaries of a platform and to incorporate things that were previously outside of the platform's parameters inside of its domain. So through partnership building, selected domains and also the stakeholders in those domains can, much like the web data that Helmond has talked about, be made so-called platform ready. And what does that mean? It means that the interactions within that partnership then with the platform are shaped by particular platform protocols in the broadest sense of that term, interfaces and business interests. At the same time, however, so that would still be kind of a textbook approach to platformization. But what is important to realize that things also kind of work both ways. So these are in turn sensitive to local norms, stakeholder objectives, which can be very varied and also in tension with one another, and also different policy frameworks at multiple levels of governance. So there's a definite sense of path dependency and a lot of bottlenecks and frictions and impartial progresses that kind of don't gel well together oftentimes in when you look at actual existing platformization. All in all, partnerships, just like other types of boundary work and boundary resource, boundary work with using boundary resources, have four functions. The one is market consolidation. Again, all four are very important, of course, to platforms and what they want to achieve. Again, this is not to say that they will achieve this, but this is kind of their main objective. Market consolidation, logistical integration with other infrastructures and networks, for instance, or other types of socio-technical arrangements. 3 is social mobilization, wants to kind of mobilize a user base or mobilize particular other societal groups, and to behave in a way that suits the platform. And 4, institutional legitimation, which is also a very important element because we've moved beyond the time of moving fast and breaking things for the most part. So increasingly you see platforms acting as policy entrepreneurs and seeking institutional legitimation, seeking a place at the table. So briefly going to talk you through the 3 main examples that we're discussing in that article. And we're taking the COVID pandemic as kind of the defining era of platforms, not just to grow in their usually described ways and the ways that we expect them, but also really to work their partnership building muscle, so to speak. And they see this very much like very opportunistically as a way to forge all kinds of new partnerships, also with public actors, public institutions. So one example, the one that I'm writing about, which is based on my own research within the larger platform labor research project that we're conducting, was set in New York and focused on DoorDash. What you saw happening at one point during the COVID pandemic, once the initial shock had subsided a bit, is that DoorDash started seeking partnerships with, well, in this case, what you see here is a tweet with New York City's public school system, who proudly or happily, I assume, tweeted out, "We partner with DoorDash." DoorDash, for those of you who are not familiar, is a delivery company or platform logistics business, as they would call themselves. And we partner with DoorDash to deliver free meals to hundreds of medically fragile students across the 5 boroughs to help them keep them safe and healthy. And so this was one way, one partnership with DoorDash used to kind of show that their platform, which is otherwise kind of used for delivering food and other products to households, that it can actually that same logistic platform could serve other more socially useful purposes. They also partner with with hospitals to give hospital workers so-called dash passes, which give them discounts on food because, of course, they were already struggling so much. So the number of these partnerships that they forged within New York City were not so much, you know, a lot of them were much more than promotional campaigns, really. They were a version of PR. But what I found very interesting is this quote from a consultant working at Quorum, which is a public affairs software program, a company that DoorDash has actually worked with, has hired. And that quote kind of gives us an idea about the larger objective of such initially seemingly kind of flimsy seeming partnerships, because they didn't last so much. They probably didn't do so much, like materially speaking, but they have a larger purpose, objective. And then we can see that by reading this quote, by introducing their policy team to many officials in New York City for the first time in a moment of support and community relations. DoorDash also expects to be able to more easily have conversations with those same officials in the future about issues their team focuses on outside of coronavirus. End of quote. So one of these issues would be that that New York City at that time was considering fee caps that they could charge restaurants, because restaurants were struggling as is. And even though DoorDash already claimed to help restaurants in many different ways, they were still charging them quite high fees, and the local city administration wanted to cap those fees. So this is one way in which, of course, DoorDash keeps that door open and knows by showing their goodwill and by showing the public value of their platform, not just the private value, they hope to be able to negotiate a better deal later on, you know, when things turn to other topics than you know, how to help out during Corona. So the second example, because I'm running a little bit out of time, I think, should hurry up, is in Amsterdam. So we moved from New York to Amsterdam, and we look at another corporate platform, which is Airbnb. And Airbnb at the time was launching its city portal, the so-called city portal in Amsterdam, to support the Amsterdam city administration, which has been for a while struggling to contain, you know, the so-called negative externalities of Airbnb in the city. I don't think I need to elaborate on that. I think most people will know something about it. One way of doing that, one way of containing these negative impacts of Airbnb is by having a better registration system, right? Where you can register everyone who engages, every household that engages in short-term rental, and you can properly tax them as well as accordingly. Now, Airbnb first resisted that, but then, of course, also wanted to cooperate with the Amsterdam municipality. And actually, Amsterdam is one of the first cities who had so-called memoranda of understanding, other types of partnerships with Airbnb. And this is one more recent iteration, namely, the point of the city portal is to help the city with registration and thereby by tax collection. And I'm just sharing a quote from the article here, which kind of illustrates our point about this particular socio-technical partnership. Namely, by integrating municipal tax collection into its platform, Airbnb is also looking to establish a long-term financial relation with cities, first Amsterdam, but it's also, of course, developing this in other cities, a relation that seems likely to become more important in light of the COVID pandemic. Namely, and we should not forget this, of course, in 2020, Amsterdam, and much like a lot of other large cities, lost, in their case, 58%, which is 160 million euros of its income from tourist taxes. So that is enormous. And if Airbnb with the city portal can help somehow, of course, Amsterdam is willing to listen. But it's, of course, not just the missing tourist revenue that reinforce Airbnb's value proposition. Of course, next to the money, there's always the data, right? The economic empowerment story Airbnb communicates to its partners, public partners, also hinges on valuable data access, because with this data, and Uber does the same thing, they offer this to particular public stakeholders and say, hey, we have all this data about, you know, who rents out their room, or in Uber's case, about urban traffic data and logistics data. Wouldn't you want to use this? So they, in these partnerships, they always manage to position themselves as useful to have at the table, and to see as legitimate actors in you know, in this case in registration, but also in urban governance more generally. So that's another example. And the final example is we're moving actually from corporate platforms, which were the first two examples, to other types of social enterprise platform in this case, which is NL Volcar, which is the largest volunteering platform in the Netherlands. And very different than these corporate platforms who rely on private equity, on venture capital, et cetera, and you know, on the financial sector. These platforms like NL Volcar very much relies on public funds, right? They partner with public with municipalities, and they sign contracts with subscriptions, and with this subscription, NL Volcar builds a local platform that can better facilitate and optimize these matching processes of people who need help and volunteers who want to provide this type of help. So this is a very different type of platform, which unlike these corporate platforms has never really had an antagonistic moving fast and break things moment, antagonistic to public administrations and to governments, but actually always kind of evolved with local public infrastructures, and always in conversation and negotiation with the government, who is actually their primary funder. Now, partnerships, of course, then are their lifeblood, especially public-private partnerships like these are the lifeblood of a volunteering platform like NL Volcar. By the way, in the picture, it says on the bag that she's infected with the volunteering virus, in case you're wondering. So another quote from the article. So when NL Volcar, that's how you write their name, which means something like the Netherlands is there for each other. When they contract with a municipality, it sets up a local serving platform that connects to the organization's national database. And while NL Volcar provides the service infrastructure and maintains a national help desk for the municipality, the daily operations of the local platform is managed by so-called local partners, and that's their name for it. Usually these are municipal volunteer centers or welfare organizations. So already existing welfare infrastructure, right? Existing public infrastructure that they reorganize and kind of embed themselves into. And while these institutions continue to also engage in offline and non-digital provided services, the platform becomes another key medium through which volunteer-based welfare activities are organized, thereby shoring up NL Volcar's social impact-driven value proposition. And their goal is to continue really increase their partnerships, increase the matches that they can make, because those matches, those volunteer matches, are the main metric by which they are legitimated, and also can maybe acquire new subscription contracts with local municipalities. Again, partnerships are vital to actually existing processes of platformization. So a couple of concluding remarks, and I'll wrap up. All taken together, even though DoorDash and Airbnb on the one hand and NL Volcar are very different platforms, they're each dependent on a robust and expanding user base that is willing to and able to operate as platform complementers, whose assets, whether it's restaurants, e-bikes in the case of DoorDash, vacation rentals in the case of Airbnb, and time to volunteer in the case of NL Volcar, can be leveraged for profit. So after the era of moving fast and breaking things, which I would say we've left that behind us, partnership building is one common strategy, not the only, but one common strategy for corporate platforms to accomplish their objectives. So really, it's we would argue more about embeddedness and seeking to become embedded than this kind of disembeddedness, deterritorialization, or the kind of disruption that a lot of the more say textbook or mainstream accounts of platforms and platformization focus on. It's not to say that there's no disruption going on, but in these cases that we're seeing, that we've studying, embeddedness is much more important for a sustainable business model, especially for a non-corporate platform like NL Vulgar. So partnerships oftentimes are a very nebulous notion. It is also important to realize. Oftentimes they don't really, they kind of mean to whatever our partner thinks it should mean, because it evokes market-driven forms of organization that value collaboration and participation. And that really resonates with public sentiments and policy efforts so popular these days that celebrate civil society as the democratic locus of problem solving and solidarity. So these companies know that, and their PR, public affairs sections know this, and they act on it, and they basically kind of use the partnership term very liberally in order to kind of establish both social and material relationships that are less nebulous as things progress and get more serious, as they get a better seat at the table. For instance, Uber, Airbnb, they're all in the Amsterdam Economic Board, just to name one example. So there's all kinds of, on all different levels, behind the scenes, in front of us, there's all kinds of ways in which they are seeking this kind of partnership-driven embeddedness. So what we call, finally, what we call actually existing platformization is a predominantly urban phenomenon, because that's where networks and infrastructures are most dense. Where platforms facilitate, engineer, and monetize boundary work, especially also the boundary work of public institutions, are responding to the logistical and infrastructural needs of institutional stakeholders at various levels in a frequently opportunistic and makeshift manner. Because again, because they claim to have done something or want to do something. Oftentimes when you look at it, also these partnerships that I looked at in the case of DoorDash, they don't really, they haven't really accomplished much on the face of it, and they seem to kind of have fizzled out. The thing is, though, if you keep trying, and just like neoliberalism, it progresses through moments of crisis, through bottlenecks, through failures. Still, though, you end up with something that's very interesting and worth studying, and that's what we call actually existing platformization. I'll stop here. Sorry if I grossly went over time. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thanks a lot, Niels. I think that we can move on. As I said in the introduction, the idea today was to trying to elaborate a sort of a planetary collection of insights. So we started from Brazil, then we moved from south to north to New York and Amsterdam. Now we go back south to Lagos, Nigeria. So I give the floor to Daniel Arubai, who is author of the piece documenting the everyday hidden resistance of ride-hailing platform drivers to algorithmic management in Lagos, Nigeria. So Daniel, please.
Thank you, Nicola, and thank you everyone for coming as well. Just a bit of a disclaimer, I did my PhD viva yesterday, so I'm a bit swamped. So I'll go on. I think I have a presentation. I do have a presentation, which I just did. Can I share? I think I don't have the access. So. Okay, I have the access now. Thank you. Oops. Can you see my screen? Yeah. So my name is Daniel Arubai. I was looking at the everyday resistances of ride-hailing platform drivers in Nigeria, and I chose to adopt the concept by Lee and colleagues on how algorithms manage workers, and specifically I used ride-hailing platform drivers, Uber mostly, and Bolt in Nigeria. So I'll just give you a bit of a background of Lagos and the gig economy there. So globally, we all know gig economy is growing, and it's about 3.5 billion, although this figure is a bit outdated. And Africa, in Africa generally, Nigeria serves almost 15% of the user market, and we accounts for almost $292 million of that. The total amount being generated from ride-hailing platforms in Africa. So you can imagine the Lagos was where like Uber came into or merged into, and Lagos is a very interesting market in the sense that it's the innovative financial capital of Nigeria. So everything passes through Lagos, basically. Yeah, and this is Lagos, if you can see my screen. It's a population of over 20 million people, and like I said, it's very interesting city, and everything technology goes through Lagos, not even the capital in Abuja. So before Uber came, we had this kind of taxis where we have this rickety old yellow taxis, and some instances we did to have this other types of taxis, no color taxis, but they were pretty much managed by like the traditional institutions like unions and the likes. And there was no way for like policymakers and governments representatives to be able to track or monitor the activities going on within the space, the taxi regime, if I must say. But with platforms, sorry, I'll go back, with platforms emerging into places like Lagos, these are some of the characteristics of which they came into Lagos. Like at the time Uber came, Bolt came, there was quite high unemployment rate. A lot of youth were unemployed, and as well as we know, we have quite poor labor laws and regulatory frameworks where it kind of like works for the platforms, right? So they come and kind of formalize that kind of arrangement and keep the workers in that unfair space, more or less. And like I said, taxes were managed in a pretty much informal way. And this is pretty much what algorithmic management does, like through the app, right? It assigns the trip, like from the concept of using ride-hailing platforms now. It assigns the trip, it monitors and surveils the workers. It's able to perform like any evaluation in terms of rating and any of all that stuff. It pays the workers, and it's able to sanction and deactivate all this based on the code, right? But often there's kind of like this contextual misplacement, or it doesn't really speak to the realities of people who exist in these places. For example, Lagos, because of some of the things I talked about earlier, the weak regulatory frameworks. Say, for example, if drivers in London go to the government and lobby them for like, oh, Uber bad and stuff like that, that won't happen in somewhere like Lagos. It's gonna take a bit more to affect the changes they want. And these are some of the burdens we like. Although I didn't mention this, I did mention this in passing, but from researchers basically in the field, they've looked about the lack of transparency and information asymmetries and biases, which kind of also cause like some form of burdens, in the sense that drivers in Lagos do not really understand what's happening on the other side of the algorithm. So they kind of try to make sense of things. So these are some examples I took on the field. This is examples of like a bonus trip or a surge pricing trip. And this is typically what you see on the interface of every trip. Like when you have a bonus trip, for example, it says, the middle one, for example, it says drive, take seven rides. As you can see, the person had already taken one. So you need to have an acceptance rate of 95%, 60% finish rate, which in real sense, sometimes it's very difficult to do. But like I said, the algorithm is the boss, right? So you have to and you have to be at the minimum of some of these thresholds. For example, the other slide shows 92% activity score. That's on both. So for you to get some of these bonuses, you need to have a certain threshold to get these bonuses, for example. But the algorithm sometimes still have the choice to block drivers or deactivate their accounts for stuff there they really do not understand. Like I said, they do not really understand what goes on behind the app. And some drivers, they complain about, oh, I got blocked for dropping this lady, and I just received this message and say, oh, you've been blocked. And it doesn't really explain why. And there's no form of like a appeals process sometimes. So it basically leaves drivers in limbo. So what are drivers caught to do? Drivers often try and manipulate the app. In that sense, I apply this James Scott's everyday resistance concept, which I expatiate in this article, where he differentiates between the public transcripts and the hidden transcripts, where like the hidden transcripts are more like the offstage covert kind of practices that no one really talks about, or it's not really forward facing. Otherwise, on the other side, public transcripts are more like the protest and demonstrations. Why I focus on hidden transcripts in this article, there in my whole thesis, I do also mention stuff about some of the public transcripts I did observe, but for the purpose of this presentation and for the paper, I mostly talk about the hidden transcripts. So I only talk about 2 in this paper, basically, of which I had 5 in the main work. So this was basically manipulating the algorithm. So I found out from talking with drivers and, had a bit of staying over with them and see where they live or how they process their work, their everyday labor. And some drivers in the first instance use like third-party apps, right? The first one I observed was this app called Lokito. It's an app used basically on an Android phone, where they basically it's like they're plotting a graph. So they put it side by side with their phone, and they kind of manipulate the main fare. So if a rider books a taxi, they put it side by side and also impute the same information on that phone, and it kind of doubles the trip. So if the trip was supposed to be 5 kilometers, it'd probably be like 10, 15 kilometers. That means increasing the fare and getting more money for themselves. Other ones include like an actual phone, basically phones that were not recommended by the platform, but workers find a way to use these phones to subvert the algorithmic rules, basically. And in a term, they call it sakamanje, which is it's a bit of like a fraudulent way of diversing or sidetracking any rules that are being sent to them via the platform. And the other one I did observe was on gaming of spaces. So in Lagos, drivers try to create some kind of surge, the surge pricing algorithm within Uber. It basically, like the image I showed earlier, if you've ever been in an Uber, it shows you, oh, there's a surge price, and that means the fare is about 3 times it's the normal fare. So what some drivers do is they because they understand the fabric of the city, they choose not to follow these algorithms, because they, in their terms, in what they say, it's a scam. And I've seen recently some researchers have also started to think about platform scams, how platforms are also indirectly scamming workers. And definitely I did observe this, as you can see, something going on in the Nigerian context. And drivers are kind of fighting back with the same platform they are being scammed on, basically. It also applies to the bonus trips I talked about, where, for example, you've gotten a request to go on 7 rides, and you get on 6 rides of that, and the 7th one you're sent a fake ride, or you're sent a difficult ride where you can't really make it to the other side of the city, and your time elapses and you don't make that bonus. So drivers have kind of hacked this kind of mentality, or what is being passed through these algorithms, and are kind of activating their own vacant spaces in that sense. Has there been any impacts? I mean, for a platform like Uber, you would imagine that would have affected much. But talking to some of the passengers in the Lagos context, they do talk a lot about why they like using cash payments, because they feel like drivers are, the platform kind of takes the money from their account sometimes when they do not know about that. And doing some reflections on that, I'm talking to some of the people in Lagos, I did find that this was actually some of the drivers' resistance practices, in the sense that when I did speak to them, they did mention some of these things that the other, like the riders in this case, do not really know about. So most of them like using cash. And in that sense, you see 13% of Uber's business model across Africa, Latin America, and these places have acquired, like most, over 13% has been on cash payments. And Uber have admitted that it's been difficult reconciling some of these fees. Is that enough impact? I don't really think so. I don't know if that would even do anything to how much they're earning, but it goes to show in the Lagos context that there is not much being done if we're to go by the public side of resistances from drivers. And in a kind of a concluding way, I do revisiting Scott's concept again. I do acknowledge the fact that it's actually difficult to, in full detail or in its entirety, classify every action as hidden resistances, in the sense that the spaces get collapsed because certain things occur outside of the digital space, and some things occur in physical space, and with the capabilities of algorithms to also have some machine to learn the whatever goes on through the app. And drivers also have their own repertoires of new hidden resistances. Sorry, is that your hand? Sorry. Okay. Have some repertoires of new hidden resistances. That kind of, in most cases, collapses those spaces of resistances. And you have riders as well who do report some of these actions, and that exposes it to the public. And in return, as a counter resistance from platforms, they do have these app updates where the platform updates the app and prevents some actions from the driver's end from happening. And drivers have a counter app update, which I talk about the repertoire of the hidden transcripts, where they refuse to update the apps, basically selling old phones with old apps, basically. So that would be all for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. And now we can move to the last stop of our metaphorical trip. So we move to China, and so I leave the floor to Jun Wang. She's a co-author along with Xinyu Yu of the article 3 Currents of Platformization in China. So please, Jun.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, many thanks to the organizer and also to the Into the Black Box project and editors actually who invited me to this special issue and also to this sharing workshop. I'm very much happy to do this, and very much it certainly is an honor to me. And I also have a few slides just to help me to illustrate my paper. Okay, so In this study, actually, I'm focusing on UGC platforms, which is the user-generated content platforms in China. Basically, in this paper, I explored 3 currents of UGC platforms. One is full of improvised effort by amateur creativities in illiberal China. One is featured with effective networking by prosumers on platforms conditioned by visibility regime. And one is featured with regulatory attempts by the hand-joining platforms and authorities to introduce a new creator economy and subsequently to define a new medium of capital accumulation. Each of these 3 currents is constituted by 2 interactive forces. The first is between the improvised public and the big brother. The second is between the internet prosumers and the corporate platforms. And the third is between the state and the corporations. Basically, actually our investigation in this particular paper very much focused on networks. We try to trace the changing networks and hierarchies of the crowd-based economy. And it's very much actually argue that the logic of visibility making coordinates the distributed agency of networking by creators, viewers, platforms, and cultural and political authorities, giving birth to multiple networked territories and multiple skills. In this sharing, I basically want to focus on 2 major networks. The first one is about the effective networking between prosumers on the platform. So I can show you this slide. Actually, I think you're familiar with the platforms of UGC. The popularity is actually everything. So the social power of algorithm, basically through the new architectural framework of sorting, classifying, and ranking different creators, through both creators and viewers into decentralized networking. In this process, we do observe networking behaviors between creators and their followers, and also between creators themselves. On platform, deploying these subscription-based business models, it has been well established that users are double objects of commodification. And the Chinese platform may be a move beyond that already. So this, what you see here is actually a screenshot of a video of an ACG platform, anime, comics, and games platform. So you will see all these different text. This video, actually the video is covered by very dense layer of we call bullet comments. All these are comments. So this is actually, and all these comments are usually using a language that only the AGC fans can understand. So in the Chinese cases, users desire to learn to use and communicate with bullet comments and memes for the purity of the community, that then carve out a new social space for community building under the circumstances of authoritarian governance. And it is very important for them to, only the insiders can get into this community and talk with each other, to understand each other, to understand the mockery and perhaps distilled from this video. But on the other hand, it is also exactly the deliberate action of these fans, the deployment of memes and bullet comments, completes the transformation of user to prosumers. That is, the monetization of users and the maximization of taste, where the culture of connectivity becomes the resource of exploitation. As a result, the practice of armature creation does not form an evenly dispersed distribution of prosumers. Instead, what has emerged are multiple parochial clusters of communities, each of which are constituted by the popular creators, their followers, and the new horizontal ties in between. Here, the second one is the one I'm currently starting on, although I have to say that I haven't actually conceptualized it in my paper. The second one is very much about networking between corporate platforms and also between platforms and the local authorities. In the year of 2011, Tencent Group introduced a new concept called creator economy, which aims to assemble different sectors along the supply chain of cultural production. Basically, the method is through financialization, through cross-holding of stocks, merge and acquire another firms. For example, Tencent also acquired China Literature, which is a platform for this kind of fiction writing. So through cross-holding of stocks, Tencent dominates the supply chain of cultural production, from literature to games to animation and comics and even to pictures. So similar strategies has also been adopted by Alibaba, which has controlled the sectors on publicity and distribution. So it's very different, somehow also different from Tencent, who is on production. This one is mainly on distribution and publicity. So actually, the strategy of Alibaba is very much again through stock holding and strategic partnership. I'm also very inspired by newspaper on partnership of between platforms and local other authorities, so that they can mobilize the boundary resources into another domain, which is very interesting. Here I think might quite maybe somehow relevant here. So here, for example, Alibaba also built up through stock holding with a number of private media, but also through partnership with some quite a number of this kind of former state-owned or party-owned media, for example, South China Morning Post, and some other ones like a city government portal also build up a partnership with Alibaba. So in this way, actually, Alibaba flexes its muscle in public discourse articulation, which then helps it to establish its monopoly in the field of culture distribution, from online marketing to ticketing. So, for example, this is a Xinjiang Weibo, which is more like a counterpart of Facebook, or let's say Twitter in China. So, by controlling actually this platform, Alibaba is able to mobilize the millions of free laborers on that platform to promote particular movies, particular TVs, or particular fictions, so that through this kind of ranking system. So this practice of aligning various platforms in different sectors along one value chain is promoted with the idea of the pathway for IP creation. Actually, this is the term introduced by Tencent, not by me. So they said that IP should not be an intellectual property, okay? IP should not be understood as something inherent in one cultural product. Instead, it's something very dynamic. It's accumulated affection. So IP is constructed through accumulated affection when the same story can be translated to different forms of culture, so that the same group of audience, fans, can be mobilized across different markets, and the size of which is expected to grow at each phase. In this account, the value of IP rests in its constant translation to different forms of culture. The value chain of the creator economy resemble what Benjamin Brenton calls the interface, which involves a number of tangible and intangible things which are arranged in a way for the succession of relays through an intended pathway. So this is basically, if we combine these two different networks together, let me just borrow the one word from the special issue introduction. I do see this platform in the creator economy operates just like an infrastructure that deterritorialize but also reterritorialize the production and consumption by stitching together prosumers, algorithm, material production, consumption, and value extraction, reorganize the entire economy that was distributed somewhere else. In terms of the first affective personal networks, we do observe multiple parochial cluster of prosumer communities. And these parochial cluster of prosumer communities are actually strategically at a broader, let's say at a higher scale, are strategically coordinated by corporate platforms and form almost another type of monopolies. We do see on one hand, there's the infrastructure, the value chain that assembled different sectors. It's more like a kind of arrangement of chain effect for the relay of things. But at the same time, interested in this kind of infrastructure perhaps is also might be resisted or at least a little bit disrupted by the prosumer's agency of eroding the ubiquity of popular culture. Because in the first slide, we do try to demonstrate that, prosumers and the viewers try to form many semi-open communities, sub-theme communities, so that there are many different multiple communities and which actually resist the homogeneous, common popular culture. Okay, so this is basically my paper in this special issue. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So after these four presentations, I leave the floor to Michael Hart, who is the director of the journal South Atlantic Quarterly. So we asked him to propose a general comment on the issue and of the presentations. So please, Michael, the floor is yours.
You can hear. Okay, stop me if you can't hear me. You're looking at me strangely. So first of all, I think these four presentations do a wonderful job of elaborating the ways, especially that corporate platforms innovate and further exploit, control the users. And the entire issue is, in fact, very exciting. I think it's wonderful how the issue manages to pose in a variety of different ways a general framework that a lot of other people are working on. Even when I think about recent issues of the journal, I mean, as you can imagine, I read the journal a lot since I read all the essays. But even just in a very recent issue about sex work, there was an excellent essay about the way that sex workers in Britain are being forced in a way to use a platform, adult work, that finds new ways of exploiting sex workers, and the sex workers are finding new ways of resisting. So anyway, only to say that I think what the papers are doing and the issue as a whole, especially, is illuminating a terrain of intellectual and political work that I think extends quite broadly. The one thing I wanted to ask is in some ways about the introduction. So Nicolo, I'm also asking you, in addition to the four presenters here, because all the papers, like I said, do show all the ways that the platforms invent new ways to gain control and extract value and exploit, etc. And the four presentations today also did all that. But not so much, and this is what I wanted to talk more about, I wanted to ask each of you about the forms of resistance or counter-platformization or modes of sabotage, etc. Daniel talked about this a bit, and I just wanted to talk about it a little further. So one of the things I liked very much about the introduction was posing platforms as a field of struggle. I think battlefield was the term used in the introduction, as a field of struggle, and that was hoping that we could try to flesh out a little bit. Let me, in fact, read you one sentence from the introduction that I thought. So it's especially if you are looking at things, the very end of the introduction, counter-platform politics. Okay. So they say this is like the almost last sentence, penultimate sentence of the introduction. Clearly, software and digital codes mainly function as machines that augment and accumulate surplus value. But we believe that in addition to the realms of sabotage and workers' management of the algorithm, it's necessary also to consider the possibility of counter platforms, that is, the formation of algorithmic subjectivities of rupture within the integrated planetary metropolis that is emerging. So here then is my, I'm asking this of all of you, but don't all have to respond, and say Nicolo too. And what if in the case of Daniel's presentation in the paper, Daniel, you do talk about the hidden transcripts, the forms of, in a way, minor forms of resistance following Scott. And I'm wondering what the limits or effects of that, and what other kinds of resistance perhaps might have to be more overt that would be effective. In the other case, with June, Niels, and Fabio, does it make sense in your cases, or has your work run into ways in which forms of resistance, or also another nice thing from the introduction is it could be just in terms of production of alternative subjectivity. It could be at that level that we're talking about this. I guess what I'm trying to illuminate here, and this is why I want Nicolo to also participate, is the two sides of this battlefield of platforms, because I think it's much easier to see the one side, class struggle from above, if you want to put it that way, or corporate control via platforms and such, or, in Niels's case, I think this beautiful example about public-private partnerships that turn into a kind of expansion of corporate access and power. But what do you say about the other side? That's what I'm asking. That's right. And so if you have nothing, it might be that your research doesn't work in that area, and you say, okay, I got nothing about that, Michael. I'll ask you something else. But I wanted to try see if all of us could imagine something, even thinking across the papers, what kinds of, flesh out this notion of a platform as a field of struggle, or the battlefield. That's where I'm going. It might be a little quiet here, or maybe Nico. Actually,
I think your network is, I can really hear you. Hello?
Okay, good, Daniel. Yeah, thanks.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yes, we can hear you.
I was saying I was finding it difficult to hear you. I couldn't really hear most of the things.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh no, that's terrible. Let me try something then.
Okay.
I'm trying a different mode. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Yes. You can hear me better. Okay, let me just repeat for a brief version then. I apologize for wasting our time.
Okay.
What I wanted is to flesh out the notion in the introduction of platformization as a battlefield, or as a field of struggle. And that's what I wanted to ask each of you, also to ask Nicolo about this, because and the introduction proposes a number of variations on this. It can be a field of struggle in terms of sabotage, small resistances, organized labor, but also even the production of an alternative subjectivity. That's part of what. Oh, and then they even at the very end offer the notion of counter platformization. So anyway, all of this to say, I think all of your papers do an excellent job of showing, what should I say, class struggle from above. The modes of control that platforms exert, new modes of exploitation, of capture of value, of control, etc. What's harder to see, and I'm not saying harder to see in your papers, what's harder for us to see in general, is that the other side of the struggle. And like I said, I think Daniel's, you're posing you're the one here been among the 4 presentations that's most looking at forms of resistance, as you point out, perhaps limited, perhaps in their and maybe different kinds of resistance would be necessary. But that's what I was hoping we could do together, is flesh out the notion of the platform as a field of struggle. And like I said, it could be that in part of your research doesn't go in that direction. You can just say, Michael, let's talk about something else. It could be that we forced Nicolo to start because he, as part of the authorship of the introduction, is proposing this concept. So that's, and even also thinking across your papers is what seems interesting to me about the possibilities. I think you see what I'm asking.
Yeah.
I know it's not an easy question.
Yeah, I mean, hello?
Thanks a lot, Michael. I don't know if there are other questions in the room. Otherwise, I think we can go on to the 4 authors for a quick response, because I think we should close in 15 minutes more or less. So I don't know if there are other questions, or again, I ask you to do your brief comment on what Michael said in a few minutes, and then I or other members of the Black Box crew will close. So please go on.
Okay, let me go first, I guess. So yeah, I do agree that it's a battlefield, right? So I think I do mention this in my paper as well, even if I would have liked to say more. But on the field, I did find even more kinds of resistance, if some of them hidden, and I did find counter resistance as well between, so below the belt, people not knowing, unions saying stuff about the platform creating pseudo unions or fake unions to sabotage what real unions are doing, or create some kind of, they call them ambassadors for these platforms, so for the Ubers and the Bolts. And these ambassadors come, so I did observe this in one of the radio interviews online, where you have these ambassadors calling in to kind of diverse or create a scene in some of these conversations and be like, oh, Uber is bad. And the ambassadors could say, oh, but Uber did that. And some of these unions leaders recognize that, okay, this is what some of these big corporations are doing as well. And as well as coming into Nigeria, we had smaller platforms, and you had platforms that wanted to come out of the compete with these bigger platforms. And you've had these bigger platforms use this form of ambassadors as well to sabotage these smaller platforms. But this is still very much, like I said, in this very sense, hidden, in the sense that you can't really, it has to be a whole lot of investigation to find out a little bit more. But this is just from the findings from some of the people, like the union representatives and some of the drivers that do know what's going on, spoke about in Nigeria. On the algorithmic side, I mean, there's a whole lot to talk about, but I'll just leave it there. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, it is a really difficult question, and I'm not even sure if I understand, if I really understand the question correctly. So I apologize in advance, Michael. You know what I found most interesting is that platforms claim to basically to reduce friction, right? To create frictionless, especially also in the field of logistics, but also maybe in terms of social connections, right? So I'm thinking of the other presentation as well. But at the same time, it proliferates all, and it also claims to reduce transaction costs because of the frictionlessness. But at the same time, if you actually look at what these platforms do, there's all kinds of frictions, there's all kinds of struggles, and transaction costs, especially for workers, because that's not what we've talked about in this paper, but of course, some of my other work does focus on very much, actually rises through the roof. It increases transaction costs immensely for some types of sides of the multiple-sided platform that they run. So I guess what so there these struggles proliferate, but what our paper has been trying to do or say is that it's kind of show how the platform takes the platforms take the partnership as a way to paper over those frictions and kind of reclaim some of that like veneer of frictionlessness, but actually struggles to do so in that very process. So there's this constant tension between kind of this struggle and the struggle by the people who use the platform and the struggle of the platform to paper over those struggles and to try to show to a wider public, and especially also public government actors that they're actually that what they're doing is actually transcendent of some of those struggles that those legislators have also seen, but actually can also be leveraged for the social good, which then transcends some of those localized struggles, or at least distracts some of the public attention towards ways that they can be useful. So I think there's just multiple ways in which struggle come up in our research. I'm not exactly sure what you meant by the other side. You mentioned the other side of a couple of times. So that would be kind of a counter question, maybe. But those are some of the things that I was thinking about in the context of the paper that we've written, an attempt of put the partnership forward as a way to kind of reduce or paper over the many different frictions and struggles that proliferate when platforms operate.
Yeah, that totally makes sense, and that's good. And all I meant, I'm sorry to express myself badly, by the other side is just that the corporate platforms always seem to win. And so how can those who are exploited by them, that's what I mean by the other side, how can they win?
Yeah. Okay, of course. Yeah, no, now I think I have a better grip on what you were meaning. And I mean, oh man, don't get me started on platform cooperatives and all that, because that would lead us into, I'm very cognizant of the time, but I already see in the reactions here in the screen above me on my fellow presenters that everybody will probably have something to say about, platform co-ops and actually existing alternatives to corporate platform struggles. My very, very, very truncated answer would be that platform co-ops elicit a whole set of other types of struggles, which not necessarily make the lives of platform workers much easier. Without, interestingly enough, I think, public support, both in terms of financing, funding that, and creating regulatory, spaces which facilitate their growth and well-being, and make the life of corporate platforms harder. You need the state, though, and there's a lot of state phobia in platform cooperatives and alternative, like peer-based, commons-based value production. There's a reason, there are good reasons to mistrust the state on different levels, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, the only realistic power that can somehow counter platform power these days, and I'm now thinking especially in terms of like Google or Amazon and stuff, is government level, public governments on a national and supranational level, like the EU, for instance. But there's I'll stop there.
Fabio, specifically with yours, I mean, just using your own rhetoric of it, with Virasal, that they are lions, but of course they're lions who have been caged and captured. I mean, is there any way of imagining that, the power of the of those who fight for survival, who are co-opted this way? Is there any way of, or ways already existing, I guess, of organization or resistance that Yeah, that would make sense of, platform as, like I said at the beginning with the introduction, platform as battlefield, platform as terrain of struggle. Go ahead, Fabio.
Thank you very much for your question, Michael. I guess that we have a lot to speak and to research about the resistances and the counter strategies mobilized by the workers here in Brazil concerning the subjectivity issues that I have been discussing in my research. I guess that we have some very interesting experiences. I want to talk about two of them. First of all, the workers, the platform workers, the delivery workers have been organizing some collective movements, crowdsourcing by popular customers and engaging into their struggles. The restaurants, bars, etc., supporters their own struggle. So they are creating a huge network, a huge popular network for reproducing their struggle. And this in many countries of Brazil, especially in São Paulo and in Rio de Janeiro, for instance. And I guess that the second interesting movement that have been happening here is the creation of YouTube channels of workers to discuss and to present, to show, to reveal, the process and the hidden structure of app companies. It's a kind of counter-informational strategy, a counter-psychological strategy developed by those workers to denounce what happened with them. So I guess that it's a kind of, how can I say that? I guess that it's a kind of new ways of organizing the workers' movement. And I guess that it's a very interesting, trying to respond to your question. Thank you.
I know that Daniel raised his hand, but I wanted to ask June if there's a way of participating in this way. I mean, maybe this isn't the way you would respond, but I'm really interested in this notion about affect or accumulated affect or affective networking. I'm wondering in some ways if somewhere on the terrain of affect and hence production of subjectivity, there might be ways of thinking of forms of resistance. But this is maybe just me projecting and not, it doesn't quite make sense in the fields you're researching.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael, for your question. I'm also very interested in that concept of accumulated affection. And so far, actually, you were mentioning, I didn't talk about the first current of platformization, but which already, let's say in China, in the first stage, actually. There were quite a number of grassroots amateur creativities produced and shared through even emails and different channels, and which include a lot of these kind of not necessarily anti-platform, but using the platform to convey some ideas that is perhaps not valued, not appreciated by the government, by the party state. In that way, so this is basically why we all, if you look at studies on Chinese platforms, it's always about whether it is public sphere or not. When it comes to the effective, the accumulated affection, what I'm thinking is actually maybe it's a very sad story, I guess. I do during my participatory observation, I do feel that a lot of in China there's a phenomenon of fan economy, And it is true that the Tencent idea is working and making a lot of money. And especially I do see a lot of fans actually trying to spend on very different forms of cultural products, even it's actually about the same story, duplicate again and again. But in a way, I'm also thinking, for example, on some, but there's also a chance for alternative voice, different, let's say, subjectivities to be nurtured, but not on those commercial ones, but perhaps on some other small platforms. And yeah, sorry for that. But anyway, I think that's very interesting to think that way. But so far, I don't think I have many evidence about that.
Yeah, if I can jump in just from the side of Into a Black Box or one side of Into a Black Box. I mean, I'm quite happy about the structure of the issue we edited because of it offers, of course, as Nicolas said at the beginning, a kind of global value of global gaze on platforms, right? And there is a kind of movement also that stress the needs to de-Westernize the gaze on platforms. And I think that in our issue, we somehow we contribute to do it. And regarding the Michael's question, I think that in our issue, we can contribute to it also to watching at the non-Western way of platform, of resisting to the destructive power of platforms. I mean, also what Daniel said regarding that in Lagos, the Uber drivers prefer cash instead of online transition, let's say. I mean, it's is another way to I think to also resistance somehow to platforms power and to platform extractivist power. I mean, in a world made online, offline resistance practices are quite various and are quite variegated, but can be jointly contribute to produce a general wave, let's say, of counter resistance of the power of platforms. And this is also something that is spreading, I guess, outside also the classic world of platforms. And what I mean, for example, in Italy last year, in 1 week, we had a kind of jointly week of logistic struggles where we had in 1 day the riders, the delivery riders struggle. The day after, or 2 days after, I don't remember, the Amazon riders struggle. And 3 days after, we had a kind of, or 4 days after, we had a kind of traditional logistics firms workers struggle. So, you know, in just to say that it was a kind of spread of the need of resistance that from platforms go back to the logistics work, the traditional logistics workers, and vice versa, to the logistics from the logistics workers go to platforms. So this is I want to say that the offline resistance can kind of inspire somehow also the power of these digital giants that kind of use their extractive power to extract value from social relation or from other stuff, as all the presentation today shows, actually, basically. So I don't know, it was just a kind of quick first move.
Thank you.
So Thanks a lot to everybody. We need to close now, and I think it has been a really productive discussion. I want again to show the issue which we are really proud of, and we plan to organize other moments for discussing it. So keep in touch and see you soon.